The Long Island Railroad DLC in Train Sim World is a huge letdown, to say the least, and it's time to tear it a new one. Although I will be heavily criticising the LIRR route in this video, I do not dislike the real LIRR, nor am I trying to piss off any fans of the real system. If anything, I actually like the real system, especially when you get contrasting environments like EMUs at the busy Penn station, unique single-track branches like West Hempstead, and the rural diesel-hauled Greenport shuttle all on the same network. Not to mention the varied motive power, and that museum at Riverhead as well. DTG's LIRR route was released in November 2018, long before Train Sim World 3 was a thing. The route is in the unusual position of being non-linear, but way too small at the same time. All we get is the New York Penn to Hicksville section of the Ronkonkoma branch, plus the branches to Long Island City, Atlantic Terminal, Vanderbilt Yard, Belmont Park, and Hempstead. That is it. There's an impressive 126 stations across 11 lines on the LIRR, but only 26 of those stations are featured in TSW. There's a lot of things I don't understand about this add-on, and I really do wonder what Dovetail thought they were playing at when they made this thing. The route itself only includes the Bombardier M7 electric multiple unit, with the Bud M3 not being released as a separately sold add-on until May 2020, long after the route's initial release. Just having two EMUs on this route in-game makes it look and feel very unrealistic because the M9 units, C3 coaches, and DM30AC, DE30AC, and MP15AC locomotives are nowhere to be seen. At the very least, the devs did a good job at modelling the trains, and although the original sounds weren't very good, especially in the M7's case, Dovetail did eventually port over the sounds from the Metro North M3A and M7A units. And I will throw the devs another bone for at least making a route focused on US commuter trains, since I prefer that sort of service over those really long and heavy freight trains. I'm looking at you, Cajon Pass. The route uses the same inaccurate passenger information screens that Dovetail would reuse on at least 4 future US routes. And as if that wasn't annoying enough, some of the ones at Atlantic Terminal don't even work properly, as all they show is the digital clock. And also, I just want to point out how bad the lighting is at this station, and it's been in this state for years. Further up the line, I saw some terrible scenery around Nostrand Avenue. The main stinger was the unrealistically quiet road, and although I can see One World Trade Center in the background, I don't know how accurate that skyline looks overall. And since when did the roads around Nostrand Avenue look anywhere near as quiet in real life as they do in-game? There is poor scenery all throughout the route. Even when you're not looking too far away from the train, like I was doing here at Queen's Village, as opposed to Queen's Reich, I could clearly see that the scenery doesn't extend all that far beyond the track's immediate surroundings, though I assume this was done either to get better frame rates or to shorten development time. Given Dovetail's reputation, it was probably the latter. There are reused buildings and other assets everywhere, and it's mostly next to or not far away from the track, and I thought it was most noticeable around Belrose Station. This repetitive scenery is so bad that it could rival the Peninsula Corridor or Oakville subdivision. Although, if you just stay in the driver's cab or the passenger saloon, you don't tend to notice the subpar distant scenery, and maybe that's what Dovetail was banking on. And if you thought the tiny size of this route or the rubbish scenery were its worst aspects, here's a reality check. This is supposed to be the busiest commuter rail network in the United States, but in-game the services in timetable mode are an absolute joke. The only services that are represented are the ones from New York Penn to Port Washington, Hempstead and Ronkonkoma, as well as Atlantic Terminal to Hempstead and the Belmont Park Shuttle. That's right, we don't see any trains going to Far Rockaway, Long Beach, West Hempstead, Port Jefferson, Babylon, or Montauk. Well, you're not going to see the West Hempstead services anyway, as they're just a shuttle to and from Valley Stream. And as if that wasn't bad enough, the few services that are represented have inconsistent and unrealistically quiet schedules, apart from the Hempstead branch for most of the day. Since when did trains call at Westbury or Forest Hills up to 6 hours apart from each other? And since when did Penn Station to Ronkonkoma services only run 1 or 2 hours apart? I mean, that's hardly realistic. And again, this is supposed to be the busiest commuter railroad in the United States. There are a lot of sidings along this route, and between Jamaica and Hollis you run right past Hillside Depot. But these sidings are only occupied in the scenarios, being left as empty ghost towns in timetable mode. The same goes for the sidings at Jamaica Station. Speaking of Hollis, this is a tiny station whose platforms won't even fit a 6-car train. But because this game doesn't have any kind of selective door opening implemented, unlike the older TS Classic, the drivers have to open the doors themselves, and you don't get enough time to run down to the right cab and only open the doors that are on the platform. This same problem is also present on the more recent Harlem Line add-on, specifically at least 2 stations, Melrose and Tremont. The inclusion of the branch to Long Island City feels rather pointless, in my opinion, especially since none of the passenger services to that station are run by EMUs in real life. In-game, there are only 2 scenarios that cover this short branch, one with the M7 and one with the M3. So you won't actually go down this branch at all if you're just playing in timetable mode. The only electrified tracks here are stabling sidings. You can only drive the Port Washington services between Penn Station and Woodside. This is disappointing because Port Washington is one of only 2 LIRR branches that doesn't go through Jamaica. The other one, of course, is West Hempstead. So this was a missed opportunity to make the route less linear. And speaking of Jamaica, this is easily the most embarrassing part of the in-game route. In real life, Jamaica is famous for the sheer number of trains that pass through on a daily basis. Apparently it's around 1,000 per day. And the incredible thing is, all these trains are operated by the same company. But in TSW, you'd be lucky to see even 2 trains in the station at the same time. The timetable mode services are that infrequent. Now I know that it's not really relevant to the LIRR, but I just want to quickly mention the IRT Flushing Line, or the 7 train as it's apparently now called. It's the subway line running from Flushing Main Street in Queens to Times Square in Manhattan, and it runs directly over the LIRR's main line at Woodside and alongside the Northeast Corridor for a short distance before going underground at Hunters Point Avenue. Back towards the eastern terminus, the 7 line meets the LIRR again at Metz, Willets Point and Flushing Main Street. But of course those 2 stations do not appear in TSW as they are on the Port Washington branch. Having played World of Subways Volume 4 a few times over the years, I'm quite fascinated to see the different renditions of the areas that also appear in TSW. especially since the World of Subways game depicts the 7 line as it was in the 1970s or 80s. If I'm not mistaken, the included motive power here is the R33 and R36WF, or Redbird, subway cars. Despite the presence of NJ Transit rolling stock in the game after New York to Trenton's release, we do not see any NJT or Amtrak trains at Penn Station or Sunnyside Yard on the LIRR version. This does nothing but make the route look even less realistic. The only New York area route in TSW that's anywhere near good is the Harlem line, and even that has still got a whole load of problems. And I dread to think how badly Dovetail would screw up a New York subway route if they ever tried making one. I'm surprised they haven't done something like the 42nd Street Shuttle, and only the 42nd Street Shuttle, as an April Fool's gag. At least then the decision to make a really short route would make a tiny bit of sense. The LIRR route in TSW is now looking very outdated, since the line through Mineola now has 3 tracks in real life. There's also a new station called Elmont, or as I like to call it, Elmo, that opened in 2021, located between Queens Village and Belrose. When you actually get around to driving a train on this route, it's a borderline tolerable experience, as long as you ignore the lifeless rails scene and subpar scenery. I used to enjoy running the Atlantic Terminal to Hempstead service, and I found the single-track section past Garden City to be the most unusual part of the run. Going out to Hicksville, on the other hand, is quite disappointing because of how abrupt the end of your journey feels. The line is supposed to continue much further, with diesel-hauled services to Port Jefferson and the EMUs ending their run at Ronkonkoma. The one thing I never liked about the Atlantic Terminal to Hempstead run is the stupidly slow crawl into and out of Atlantic Terminal, where the speed limit is only 5 miles per hour. This isn't actually Dovetail's fault, as I remember hearing about how the speed limit was severely reduced following a derailment in 2010. As for the driving experience, the M7 feels a lot more sluggish than the Metro North M7A. When you pull away from a station with the throttle on 50%, it doesn't accelerate anywhere near as fast as the M7A. So the M7's physics are either more realistic or underpowered. And it wouldn't surprise me if it was the latter, since Dovetail doesn't seem to care about the American add-ons anywhere near as much as the Brits and Germans. The M7's brakes can be deceptively powerful, especially given how heavy the whole train feels. One time, I was approaching Belrose in the rain, and because I wasn't concentrating properly, I entered the platform at an alarming 50 miles per hour. But with the brakes fully applied, the train somehow stopped with only half of the first coach beyond the platform. The station stops seem way too short for my liking. You're expected to only have the doors open for 20 seconds before closing them again and heading off to the next station. And I wouldn't have thought that the station stops would be that short in real life. The Long Island Railroad uses a similar in-cab signalling system to the Northeast Corridor. This is needed for trains that go faster than 79 miles per hour, but the LIRR trains only go to 80 miles per hour, so I question why they have in-cab signalling in the first place. Or maybe it's to do with the fact that they partially run alongside the Northeast Corridor just out of Penn Station. There is one major issue I noticed with the in-cab signalling that, for whatever reason, is still present in the game. If you were to drive a Hempstead or Ronkonkoma service out of Track 8 at Jamaica with the cab signals enabled, you will be stuck on a signal speed of 15 miles per hour for an unreasonably long distance, thus making it impossible to arrive at Hollis or anywhere past Floral Park on time. For the longest time, there was a major bug with the signal speed at Garden City. Coming back from Hempstead, and if you had the cab signals enabled, you were limited to only 15 miles per hour until well after the platform, meaning it was impossible to arrive at the next station on time. Surprisingly, Dovetail actually came back eventually and fixed the issue on this section. Certainly took them long enough. But I wonder why they still haven't bothered to fix the issue between Jamaica and Hollis. It's a shame that such a unique, busy and varied commuter rail network was done so dirty by Dovetail Games. The only reason I've still got this DLC installed is so the LIRR trains can appear on New York to Trenton. And this LIRR route is so bad that it's borderline unplayable. And it's not often I say that about a TSW product. If you haven't got this thing yet, don't waste your time and money. It's not worth it. There are several other TSW routes that are actually worth your time, such as the Cathcart Circle, Island Line 2022, Niedertalbahn, and Boston Sprinter.